Welcome to the Art of the Twist and LudoNarraCon 2022. This is a live recording with all of our wonderful panelists who are going to introduce themselves shortly. I am Tanya X. Short, the captain of Kit Fox Games and the lead designer and writer of Boyfriend Dungeon, which has a couple of little twists in it. But maybe we'll talk about a few other things. Who wants to go next?
I'll volunteer. I'm Sarah Northway. I run Northway Games, and I've written a lot of narrative for a few games. So I'm going to talk about Rebuild 3 today. That has a big twist ending, and my upcoming game, I Was a Teenage Exocolonist, which has a demo in the LudoNarraCon festival this week. And I co-wrote that with Lindsay Ichihiro, and it's like 600,000 words of text and has some pretty big twists and some pretty big changes.
I'm Greg Labanov. I've made a bunch of indie games. I'm probably going to be talking mostly about Wandersong, my game from 2018 today, but I might bring up some stuff from Chicory at Colorful Tale, which came out in 2021.
I'm Zoliver Nelson Jr. I'm a writer and director over things at Strange Scaffold. I've worked on dozens of games, but the ones that I'll be talking about today are primarily going to be Hypnospace Outlaw and An Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs.
And I'm Sam Barlow, co-founder of Half Mermaid, and I made games such as Her Story, Silent Hill Shattered Memories, currently finishing up a game called Immortality, which is why I look very tired. Twists. There's lots of twists in those things.
I think we can maybe go in reverse chronological order. So as you feel yourself approaching spoiler territory, people can sort of mute us for a minute or two. Let's start with Shattered Memories. What happened that made a twist occur? I played the game in one sitting. It was a sleepover. My friends came over and we played the game and passed out. And I don't remember the twist. What happened?
Oh, so, okay. Spoilers. I mean, it's very hard to get hold of this game because it was on Wii. I don't have a copy myself, so it's going to be fine. So there were several twists. One twist was that this game was marketed as a remake of Silent Hill 1, and it kind of was and kind of wasn't. So that was going to be a surprise. But the main narrative, the game starts with a car crash. A father is looking for his daughter. She's gone missing in the middle of this snowstorm, sets out to find her. And the game was bracketed by sessions in which the character played by you was interviewed by a psychologist in first person. And so you would kind of go back and forth, have these questions as you're in therapy, talking about events, and then cut back to gameplay where this guy, Harry's looking for his daughter. And you kind of keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at the very end, you finally arrive at where you think you're going to find your daughter, and you enter the room, and the reveal is that all along it's actually been the daughter who's been sat speaking to the therapist, talking about how she lost her father when she was 7. You, the player character, have been inhabiting this phantasmagorical projection of her memories and desires for her father. And so you then have this kind of cathartic moment where you're this kind of Frankenstein's monster who does exist, but is not really a real father. And the daughter then has this kind of acknowledgement of that. But I think it was the first video game to make use of the twist where we're kind of not lying, but misleading you by showing you things through the eyes of a character. Right, you can do this in literature quite a lot. A lot of thrillers will, have this kind of unnamed first-person narrator, and then at some point you realize it was someone completely different. So here, by having you sit through these therapy sessions, you just made certain assumptions about the chronology and about who you were playing. But the kind of point of it was to give you this emotional catharsis of giving up this character that you had created of the father, who themselves was molded in this game through decisions you were made, and you kind of added dimensionality to it. So that as the player, when you realized that your character didn't exist, you kind of had some crossover with the protagonist of the daughter, who was kind of through these therapy sessions acknowledging and having to come to terms with the loss of her father. So it was, and we basically put 90% of our development effort into that twist. So every
really
single
cool.
thing you did in the game set it up. There were I don't know, like 30 or 40 different car crashes in the game in various abstract forms to basically just slowly in the back, like, you know, it's a Silent Hill game. So the puzzles, it was like you need to get the key to open the door. And so you had to crash a model train to get the key out of the model train. Like we just kept repeatedly putting all this imagery so that when it happened, you were like, well, of course the car crash was the key moment and things did not happen as they
Were there
should
were there
have
any
done.
moments you had to change something to make it work better? Like any iteration? I mean, I know this is a long time ago, but like, were there any major iterations you remember?
I
Or
think
was it
there were a
just
few
like you filled
things-
in the blanks and then it worked really well and it was shipped?
I think the big thing which is different to most other bigger games I've worked on was that for various reasons we had there's like 6-month period that was just me working on this thing and writing it before the team came on board. So kind of when everyone came on board, it was like, this is the thing we're trying to do. Everyone is working towards this. So like I was saying, like even like the very basic level with art and textures, normally when you're making a big video game, everyone's just throwing stuff in, right? And the artist will put a picture of their favorite dog in, or someone will put some little Easter egg in or whatever. On this game, it was like nothing goes into this game that does not tie into this. So everything, there was like this checklist that people could check that was like image systems in the game. So it was stuff like photography as a means of capturing the past and whether or not photography is a true, like factual capturing of the past. And there were all these little image systems that were interrogating her story and the fact that she had this memory of this father that she had then exaggerated and developed over the years. And so if someone wanted to put a little prop in or put a funny book or a magazine cover or a poster or a bit of trash on the floor, they would be like, oh, this should tie into this in some way. And they could pick from these image systems. So it was, you know, it was very much, it was like a lot of work. So there were no like huge gotchas.
So you created problems in every other area so that the twist wouldn't have a problem, is kind of what you're saying?
I think that the biggest problem we had was, as always, communicating to the people on the publishing side. And I'm trying to remember when this was. This was what, 2008, 2009? So when we were saying to them, like, the point of this is this big twist. And everything builds towards that. And even we did a lot of things which some Silent Hill fans don't love in terms of making the puzzles, I'm not going to say easier or simplified, but we knew that if the point of this was to get people to this cathartic moment, it wouldn't work if they didn't get there, right? So we tried to make it so this was a game that did not make you spend 3 hours running around a hospital because you missed a thing. Yeah. So that was the goal. But so the only problem I remember having was the certain higher-ups at the publisher were like, oh, well, if this is supposed to be a twist, it should be a surprise. So you can't be putting all these hints and clues in because it wants to just be like, whoa. And that was me trying to, like, it's the hardest thing when you're trying to explain narrative technique to somebody that's like, well, I watch lots of movies, right? So I know how this works. And it's like, well, a good twist, and this is something I've carried forward, is a good twist is not a surprise. If a twist is a complete surprise, if it's the butler did it, you lose the emotion because then you stop and you think, wait, how does that, what? And you start trying to figure out the logic of it. A good twist is one that the audience has already put together and then dismissed and then moved on from, so that when it drops, the logic is already, so that's like, oh, no, it does make sense. And oh my God, all of a sudden, there's this emotional impact. I wrote an article recently about twists where I said that for me, like a lot of times in media, people talk about twists and they judge them by the violence of the twist, like just how shocking and oh my God it is. For me, like the only point of a twist is if the story that comes out of the twist is more interesting and more complicated than the story before it. And the reason you do a twist is because you're using the player or the audience's brain to then assemble that more complicated version of the story. And you get more interesting layers out of it. I think there's something primitive as well with, like, I'm obsessed with the idea that storytelling is kind of hacking the simulation tech in our brains, right? We have all this stuff that imagines things so that we don't get eaten by predators, right? We're little mammals running across in the grass, and the grass moves, the reason we exist as humans and have survived is because we can imagine, oh crap, what if there's a snake in that grass, and we run away, right? We can genuinely be scared of a thing that doesn't exist. And we hack that for storytelling. And I think there's something very powerful in a twist whereby if you have people invested in a story, so they have this version of the simulation in their heads, and then you twist it, if you get it right, there's a part of their brain that's like, oh shit, we had it wrong all along. The snake isn't there, it's over there. And so the brain redoubles your efforts, right? And you become doubly immersed. So that for me is the kind of art of a twist is a good twist should not kick you out of the narrative. It should actually make the narrative twice as impactful and should take you to a more interesting place.
I can confirm that from the other side. I was the executive producer and like editor, I guess, of one of the games we put out, Lucifer Within Us, which was a mystery that was supposed to have a twist of sorts at the end. It was not signaled enough. The snake being over there was not satisfying. So it was really, there's not a snake there, it's over there, and the general response was, okay.
Did you have a sense that it wasn't going to work before it came out? Or was that like a surprise? Okay.
Well, I mean, there was a little bit of back and forth in the design team, but it ultimately, it wasn't, one person's call. But yeah, no, I suspected, but I didn't have such strong convictions. I was willing to delay the game significantly to fix that. We couldn't go back and I love hearing about how Sam structured the entire production around protecting the twist and supporting the twist, because that makes sense to me in retrospect. But doing that work afterwards for Lucifer Within Us would have been a huge undertaking, we realized. So I just sort of let it go, but it absolutely came to bite us, I guess, like a snake that we didn't expect.
I also find that when it comes to twists, a unique ability that games have compared to other mediums is the ability not just to recontextualize information you previously absorbed, but to recontextualize how you experience that information. Suddenly you see a scene, and instead of your hands being, a camera, it's a gun for some, sort of gauche example. And that's why that's actually been the reason I've joined several projects. So for Hypnospace Outlaw, I love everything that Jay Tholen makes, of course, but Jay told me that spoilers, Hypnospace Outlaw would have a stage in the game where eventually a major disaster or cataclysm happened, and it fast forwards like 20 years, and you're in basically what is the modern day playing an internet archivist, going through the loop of your entire, desire of engagement with the game is to find the weird web pages, and then that becomes what the entire game is. And going through that process actually lets you open up and reveal and solve the final mystery that's been underlying the game the entire time. And seeing that recontextualization, going from a cool, Y2K era internet simulator to, holy crap, we're internet archivists? That's how this changes. The fact of how it feels different in the mind and in the hands, that pretty much single-handedly there told me I had to be a part of this. And then I got to be a part of like all sorts of decisions to support that. Like, hey, because we're archiving it, should we be able to archive it for a linear sequence of 30 days? And I said, no, that's 30 versions of hundreds of pages. We got three big ones that show big changes, and all sorts of other things that make a twist like that occur without killing everyone involved.
Yeah,
with something like that. Oh, sorry.
Good. I was just going to say, I feel like I had the same thing where I surprised people a little too much for Rebuild 3, the twist ending. And spoilers, you've spent 40 hours in the campaign trying to cure zombieism. So it's a city builder where you're like rebuilding after the fall of man and stuff, but you're trying to cure the disease that's still out there. You get close to the end of the campaign, you find the cure. It's a little dodgy how you find it, but you start producing it, passing it out, and the last couple stages are like this kind of happy, easy thing. And then you realize that the cure that you've been handing out is not a cure at all. You're making these like zombie super soldiers. You've been a patsy for someone else all along. And it ends like terribly, like right at the last minute, you become a zombie. the UI starts falling apart to kind of show your brain is falling apart. And the only choices you're left with in the end are like sacrifice yourself and like nuke the whole city, or give in and like join the bad guys basically. And people freaking hated it. And I feel like a lot of that is because I was not telegraphing early enough and often enough. And I'm like, every time I got that feed, people were just like, I played 40 hours trying to save the world. And then right at the end, you just like, you just like chuck me off a cliff. Like, I feel terrible now. And I'm like, but it's a zombie movie. Like, have you never seen a zombie movie? Like, do you not know the genre? It has to end. There might be a little bit of hope, but it has to end badly. It can't just be happily ever after. They just were not happy with that. So I actually put in a happy ending that you have to then go back and replay the entire 40-hour campaign with a wiki. But there's like a true happy ending, and that mollified everybody, made them happy.
Right. And that's super tough in a like a simulation building kind of game too, right? Because it is all about progress and building up your numbers.
Exactly.
And
You
the
don't want
mental
those
way
numbers
you
to go
picture
away.
your entire
It was a
goal,
bad fit. But it was satisfying and memorable. And a lot of people talk about the twist of, especially when you become the zombie and start doing bad things, and you're trying to maintain control literally of the UI and like make decisions, and you just can't. Bad things just keep happening. People did really like that kind of turnabout, and it's after that long, you have to end the game somehow.
I do feel like the thing you mentioned about the interface changing to reflect the new state of the player character, the protagonist's perspective, it sort of keys into what Zlavia was talking about with the unique agency that's given by games, like the twist changing that agency and changing then the player's own identification of what they have done. It does feel like that's a unique possibility of games. It seems a bit terrifying as something else you can screw up, but
I feel like it was always the go-to. So I was like involved a lot in this kind of interactive fiction scene in like the late 90s, where everyone was like trying real hard to do interactive things with narrative that were interesting. And I feel like definitely the go-to was the shock factor of player doing things, and then you go, aha, actually, you've been doing something else all along. But I think I guess there's a kind of cheap, glib way of doing that. And I guess sometimes, and there's also that conflict with the extent to which people's expectations are being met, whether that's mechanically, right? So yeah, if I'm playing a strategy game, my expectation is I do good strategy and I should be rewarded. I remember one of my favorite gaming memories was, this is a very old game, so I can spoil it, Ogre Battle 64, which was a RTS strategy RPG hybrid. And I played that game for, 70, 80 hours. And I played it as a strategy video game whereby I would start a map and I would invade and win every little fort and vanquish every area, move on, continue doing this. And you get to the end of the game and it's some big kind of riff on the War of the Roses or something. And so I won the game, won the final battle, and then the rest of my little rebellion group turned around and went, "You're actually a psychopath. You enjoy this fighting too much. You're just running around murdering people. Thank you for helping us win, but we're now going to lock you up and get rid of you." And then you just get like 2 screens of text that say, after you were locked away, the neighboring kingdom saw the weakness, attacked, destroyed everything, and it was 20, 30 years of the Dark Ages visited again upon your country. And I was like, oh my God. Because this was like, I don't know, this was sometime in the 90s, I guess. But yeah, it was like, I just played this strategy game for 70 hours, and all this time, the game was judging me. And that was definitely like, I enjoyed how bad it made me feel. Like I just like those 70 hours had been wasted. But it was in the same way that you can watch a movie and have a bad ending and still feel like everything was worthwhile, right? Which I think is, to your point.
So it worked for you. That one worked for you.
And I love how it made you question your verbs, right? Because you played the strategy game well, but doing that well involves subjugation and conquering and dominating in a way that forced you to recontextualize your actions in a really satisfying way. That's really cool.
Yeah, Greg, you haven't said much about your games. You said you wanted to talk about a twist in Wandersong. I feel like maybe I didn't get far enough to experience.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that as... Yeah, so Wandersong, it kind of applies to some stuff we brought up. Wandersong it's a game where you're playing as a bard, and it's like the world is ending, and you're going on this quest. Most adorable bard, and you're going on this quest to save the world. Like the way the game starts is like this like angel shows up, and she's like, "We're looking for a hero. You're not a hero. You're just a bard." And so the whole story is about how you're like not a good fit, and you're kind of trying to like save the world, even though you're like not the right person to do it. You don't have the skill set to do it. And then about halfway through the game, which some would say is way too far into it, it turns out that there actually is a hero to the story, but it's not you. She's also there though, and she isn't really happy with what you're doing and has like her own kind of like path she's going on to try to save the world. And so, and it like there's a bunch of hints for that building up to it. Like you're finding like dungeons that she's already beaten. You're like get hints about bosses that are coming up that are already dead because she's already killed them. And you like run into all these problems that like she's like created, like you're kind of like on her trail or something. And I think the game gets really, really good, especially after that, because it brings up all these fun questions about like, well, what happens when like someone else is doing your job but differently, and like she doesn't want you to be there, and like how do you save the world when someone is just a cool person with a sword? And there's one really cool bit where how in the very beginning of the game, like the very first tutorial, like it doesn't teach you how to sing. It actually teaches you how to use a sword, which you're really bad at and lose right away. But then right after it reveals that she's the hero, you play as her using the system they taught you at the beginning of the game, but now you're actually really good at it. And she has like an iframe dash and a health bar. Like her whole like view of the world is completely different from yours. Like she's just playing a different genre of game on the same kind of like format. So it's all that stuff. It's like, oh, like there's a different game inside of here, and this one in Wandersong, it's kind of about genre, how like you exist in a different genre of the same world, and so like that changes how you see the same characters. Like for her, what are just random bad guys are for you like NPCs you would talk to. Um, so yeah, I think it's a really really fun twist, but a lot of people even playing the game really earnestly and loving it like would not get that far into it. It goes like to great lengths to sort of settle you into a like a rhythm, like it feels like okay, like you see the same thing happens twice for the first two chapters, and you're like, okay, so I feel like it's gonna go like I feel like I know where it's going, and that's part of what like the surprise is like, oh, the third time it doesn't go the way you expect. Like someone else shows up and kills the person you were supposed to meet, or whatever. But it takes so long that a lot of people don't get to there and don't get like that cool second half of the game that works quite differently. I think part of the problem there is like there is sort of a feeling like I think if you were asking somebody who was like right before then what the story was, they would say like, oh, like XYZ is happening in the plot and something weird's going on, but I don't really know what it is. And I feel like if instead it was like XYZ is going on and I have this really specific question that I like there's a mystery that I don't know the answer to, and that's what the twist was like answering, then I feel like a lot more people would have been like had momentum to kind of keep going to see that. But because it was like almost too much of a surprise, people didn't. But like yeah, it's weird because I think there's a lot of really like good hints, and when people see it, they're like, of course. But it's like yeah, the level that it's hinting on is so like you're not thinking of this like when you're seeing like I don't know like so many characters are saying to you all the time like, oh, you're not a hero, you're not meant to be here, whatever. Like that feels like theming. It doesn't feel like they're setting up a plot twist even though they are. So yeah, I don't know.
It's cool that the game, like you have half a game post twist, because I think like a big distinction is there are lots of games that do the twist at the very end, right? Which
right
is in some ways easier to do because you don't then have to deal with the fallout of everything that's now been upended and twisted. But there is definitely something interesting about giving you that huge shift and kind of reboot in what you think's going on, and now you're moving forward with a kind of whole different energy.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. Like that's something that you brought up too, is how like you like it when the twist sort of adds to the richness of the plot. That's right. That's why we felt like it had to keep going from there, because it's like, well, now it's good, like now I really want to know what happens. Before I was just like cranking out the motions. I really like that. I think it works really like it's that like the story hero's journey thing where like you have to have that dark point in the middle, right? That's where I like a twist to go, and there's usually one at the end as well, but I'm not talking about those ones.
I think that's something that has always frustrated me with games and did kind of lead to her story. Was like if I look at twists in conventional literature or movies, twist something that happens every scene, right? Like if you're trying to be very rigid as a screenwriter, it's like, well, every scene has to have a turn at the end. Something has to, you go in thinking A and it flips, whether it's character dynamics or something. And the games that are usually held up for having these big narrative twists, usually it's like story, twist, and that's it, you get one twist. One of the things I loved about the Phoenix Wright games was they're constantly throwing twists at you, like a proper exciting story and thriller. So I was interested in seeing what it would be like as a game to just in live in a world where you're constantly uncovering twists and constantly kind of having these things in flux. And one of the challenges, I mean, looking at Phoenix Wright, for all that I love that series, there is such a rigidity to, you're essentially on a train track and you can either proceed and uncover the twist or you hit a dead end. And in terms of the kind of detective gameplay, sometimes, and this is always like the challenge in linear media, is when you see a twist coming, right? Or, oh, well, I know that this person is lying. And oftentimes in like the Phoenix Wright games, if you saw the twist coming, if it wasn't the right time for you to reveal that, you couldn't. You just have to sit on your hands and kind of wait it out. And so when I made Her Story, the goal there was to create a game in which you're exploring the story and attempting to uncover twists. But there was no bottleneck. There was no gatekeeping. You know, if you saw something happen and went, well, hang on a minute, I think XYZ, the game had a crudish but still manageable system in which you could essentially express that to the game and then see something, right? So
yeah, I thought that was deeply satisfying in Her Story and Telling Lies, when I could immediately express to the game, like, I get it, and you had a lightning bulb a couple of times. There are a couple of different realization moments, and then have the game sort of recognize that and change sort of what you're seeing was very, very satisfying for me. I know we had a problem where, so the mascot of Boyfriend Dungeon, the sort of tall, dark, handsome, shirtless with a rose guy in Boyfriend Dungeon, he has a secret life. He has a double identity. And we had a problem where we were telegraphing it throughout his plot line, and the actual reveal happens midway through. So out of 6 ranks, you get it in like rank 4, I think it is, 3 or 4. But there were lots and lots of players who picked up on the signals, and they were like, you know, I bet this is it. And we have a problem where it's a traditional styled visual novel in a lot of ways. And so the very dialogue options themselves, you have this option. Like, do I put in an option there that clearly reveals it to anybody who hasn't figured it out yet?
Yeah.
Or do I just give them options that don't reflect the player's mental state at all? Because both ways are sort of lose-lose, and it makes this sort of storytelling very, very difficult. We ended up sort of just like never giving that kind of option until it's revealed, just sort of wiggling around. Where players might normally expect to interject something and just not letting them say anything.
Which probably felt worse in a different way too to some people.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I think
like,
you can.
Yeah.
So you can lean into like the dramatic irony sometimes, right? If the protagonist doesn't see the twist coming, but I think that has to be the story. And
yes, no, and in this, it's like, because it's traditional visual novel as well, people expect to self-insert very, very strongly. Like they really expect to be themselves and to have the character not distant from their own mental state. So that, yeah, it reduces the strength of some things and increases the strength of other experiences, let's say.
I remember always being frustrated as a youngster playing Ocarina of Time, and like the big twist, I don't know, is it a third of the way through, where you collect all the jewels to save the world and you doom the world in doing it, and we saw it coming a mile off. So we were like, we don't want to give the jewels, we don't want to take the jewels to Hyrule Castle because this is not going to go well. And the game's like, well, you got to. Like, okay. At this point, yeah, Link is someone else. He's doing that thing.
This is kind of why I really appreciate stories that have their twists at their opening, to be honest. That's pretty much everything I work on these days. This idea that you start with a new normal. Hey, here is either the way the world used to operate or how things are now. That has changed. Now we're going to follow all of the implications for the entire course of the adventure. And that also...
Would that count as a twist? Exactly. exactly. I mean, I guess if you didn't signal it
Bit.
to marketing, like if people bought it thinking it was A, and then you're like, oh, it's A squared or something like that. I don't know.
But at that point, you're also kind of you're uncovering on these things that I call micro twists, which are, okay, now that I'm dealing with this renewed situation that is atypical, what are the different ways that expresses itself? How does that, in each conversation or each game interaction with our verbs, evolve my understanding of this deeply altered state of the world? And we leaned into this a lot on An Airport for Aliens Currently Run by Dogs, by essentially having 3 layers of archaeology before the current game, which is, first there were humans, then there were aliens, then there were dogs. Also, you tend to be a human. So from the very starting off that you are a human being in this world instead of a dog, and then uncovering all the implications of that very quickly and having those conversations be these kind of quick change turns through different emotional pathways, hinting at this much deeper world, we found that it tended to, for a game that is pretty inherently self-awarely ridiculous in the mold of classic like Adult Swim things, people tended to approach it in a much more serious way because they weren't just there to be told a joke at. They were investigators from the beginning because the way in which they were approaching the world was from the beginning made off kilter.
Yeah, is it even possible to have like a mystery without having twists? Like you need that, right? You need surprises and stuff to uncover. You need something where your the default expectation is not reality. Otherwise, it's not really much of a mystery.
I think the fun thing with interactivity, so like when I made Her Story, I dug into a lot like the history of the detective genre, how it had evolved, and the big challenge throughout the last century was that the point of these stories was to surprise people and to have satisfying mysteries. So when you first start with like Agatha Christie, it's a puzzle box, there's a cool solution to the puzzle. At some point, Agatha Christie has done all the possible twists and solutions. And you then, like the genre evolves and it becomes the how done it, which was like Columbo. At the start of an episode of Columbo, like you were saying, you see who the murderer is. So the twist kind of is happening at the start. You see the murderer. And then the rest of the story is how did they cover it up? How did they pull it off? Will Columbo discover what's happening? And you suddenly have far more interesting character dynamics because you, the audience, know who did it. So you have this layer of dramatic irony. You're watching them suffer as they talk to Columbo and stuff. So they that gave people a new light in terms of different ways to surprise the audience. And then kind of towards the end of the century, that also had run its course. And you got into the why done it, where we said, okay, let's take all the tropes of the detective story. Now the mystery we're trying to solve is the deep mysteries of the human mind. So, you then get these dark psychological Scandinavian stories that are like digging into serial killers, or something like True Detective. The cop is the source of the mystery, and it's their psychology that we're delving into and revealing layers of. So you saw that people were constantly trying to surprise the audience, and at points the audience was becoming too saturated. The thing that I loved with Her Story was what I found is that to surprise people, often the solution to mysteries would be quite surprising, and to the point where it would be unsatisfying, right? People like, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, there's this big reveal. I think like the extent to which some of the kind of offensive tropes about people's sexuality and identity and a lot of thrillers in the 80s and 90s were just trying to get the most kind of shocking, extreme twist out of you, which would be like Michael Caine in a raincoat and a blonde wig coming after you or something. What was interesting with Her Story was because the player was uncovering the twist, and because the player was going, wait a minute, could it be? And they were digging into their memory bank of all these different outrageous twists. Because the player was positing, is it this thing, and then typing in a word, when the game said, yes, it is, instead of them going, oh, that's crap, that's just so ridiculous, they would go, oh, wow, that's really cool, that's the thing I thought it was. And so they were kind of much more involved in crafting of this thing and had much more ownership over it. So it made it easier to kind of massage these stories that you want to be surprising and ridiculous.
On paper, her story is a bit absurd.
Yeah, I mean,
but in the experience of it, it's like
yeah.
genuinely like exciting to realize. Yeah.
And that was one of the twists was by using the look of a true crime, very prosaic police camcorder footage. We can slip in a story which was extremely gothic, right? It's all Attic's twins, just like very OTT stuff, but just kind of slip that under the radar because of the aesthetic.
So we're running late towards the end of our time, but I thought maybe we could have a little bit of a lightning-ish round before we wrap up of twists that you've been excited about lately or pleased by lately. Did anybody want to start off with an excitement? Something you haven't made yourself.
Lately. I wanted to mention the idea of using twists as like a Trojan horse. So I always say this, but genital jousting. It's the dumbest game. It's very childish, and it has a single-player campaign that's entirely about toxic masculinity. But it's not entirely about it because it draws you in with the childishness and the dumbness, and it like kind of gets on your side and says, "Yeah, we should be tough and get the girl." And then halfway through, they do the reveal that like that's actually not very good, and the main character like learns to get in touch with his more sensitive side. And it's just like, I cried, everybody cried. It's so dumb because it looks like the stupidest game, and they genuinely were really trying to aim for getting like young men who think fart jokes are funny to play it and to learn something about themselves and about masculinity and what it means to be a macho guy who has a dick or whatever. So yeah, I always just like, I love that idea, the idea of kind of getting on someone's side and then slowly, maybe not necessarily right away, but changing the narrative on them while they're in the middle of it, like experiencing and running it. So I do a lot of that in Exocolonist as well. I was like kind of inspired by it, but yeah, that game's been out for a while. I'm not sure what lately I've played that's had a twist.
I love Severance. I'm not gonna. It is pretty recent, so I'm not gonna spoil it. But the idea of Severance starting with this very simple sci-fi analogy in every episode, finding a way to twist your understanding of it in a way that's new and brilliant and horrifying is incredible. But I'd say that the most effective twist massively effective. I adore that. But to some of Sam's earlier points, I think the twist that's actually haunted me the most, because Severance is straight up a great story, the twist that's haunted me the most is Nightmare Alley, Guillermo del Toro's recent remake, because it is inevitable. It's set up, it's a piece of information dropped in the beginning of how you make what's called a geek. This basically how you turn a man into a monster for the purpose of a carnival show. And by the end of our story, our con man, our sinner turned saint turned come up, is put into a position to become a geek himself with the signature phrase that was introduced in the beginning of the tale, and it even a half hour before it happens, you can feel it happening. The story is drawing you into the hole that it's going to strand our main character in. But if anything, that inevitability made it so satisfying and terrifying, especially when you see how the main character also treats it with this dramatic inevitability. This is where I was always, he says, "Sir, this is what I was born for." And Bradley Cooper gives one of the most terrifying, convincing, genuinely ecstatic final laughs I've seen in cinema. Because he's followed this story too.
Right.
I'm just thinking about that movie again. I saw a Q&A for that movie, and they talked about filming that scene and how they'd kind of kept building up to it, and then they ended up shooting it when they had a spare afternoon and just went for it and got it out of the way. When I was thinking about detective stories, so this is a reasonably old suggestion. There's a book called The Devotion of Suspect X, which has a games tangent because it was translated from the Japanese by the same guy who translated Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy 12. It's a very good translation. Is the example I give of a twist that for me is like the perfect twist, and it's a piece of crime fiction that's essentially a howdunit. You kind of know who was murdered and by whom at the start, and then you spend the whole novel with this pristine kind of logic puzzle of, well, how did they get away with it? And then when they reveal the solution to that logic puzzle, it also has such a incredible, like, it gives so much dimension to the character and delivers this incredible kind of beat for the character that just is so devastating emotionally and just reconfigures how you've thought of everyone in the story, that I was like, oh, that is, like, in terms of classic linear twists, one of the best. So if anyone wants to read a book, The Devotion of Suspect X. The Devotion of Suspect X.
Devotion.
Okay.
I'm writing all these down.
Yeah, I
up.
recently read the first Agatha Christie for the first time, the Mysterious Affair at Styles, and I learned a thing or two. I gotta say, I hadn't read any Christie before, and it was good fun.
The hard thing with Christie is if you even go as far as Googling or just even looking at half the blurb when you buy the book, it'll be like, this is the book with had the first ever twist, blah, blah. And you're like, no, I haven't read that one.
I don't know. I spend a lot of my time dreading twists, if I'm completely honest. Like, I think most fantasy, science fiction, post-apocalyptic, like any major genre fiction, I don't want it to twist. I'm really worried that they're not going to spend enough time building up the characters and the world building and like Station 11. I enjoyed the book, and then I watched the show, and I was like, they've changed so many things. Are they going to try and like twist something here? And thank God it was a good story instead. But yeah, it's a tough world out there. It's twisters.
Yeah, I don't know. One of my favorite things is when a piece of medium like subverts your expectation, like makes you think it is one thing, a boring thing where you already know where it's going, and then they're like, no, delightful, we're doing something new and different. Like,
I genuinely,
broad fractions.
My favorite twists are the ones where I think someone has done a bad job. There's a movie which I rewatched recently and actually hated because it was so mean. But the movie Fallen with Denzel Washington, there's a point halfway through where there's a plot, there's a solution to the puzzle of the thing, and I'm screaming at the screen, that doesn't make any sense. You've established the rules of how this power works. Oh, such bad writing. And I'm just getting angry at this story. And then ultimately when it resolves, you realize that everybody involved has also misjudged it. And actually the rules do make sense. And it's this big, horrible, devastating twist. But for me, there is no greater doubling down or catharsis than me acknowledging that I was wrong. And then the guilt, all the free-floating anxiety that comes with that then attaches to my attempt to then double down my immersion afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, crap, I got it wrong. Now I feel bad because I was shouting at the screen. I was saying the writers were dumb. Oh, I got to quickly move forward solidly.
So what's on your mind, Greg?
Greg, why don't you give us your fave, and then we'll start the round of plugs and goodbyes.
I'll go into zero detail, but when I think about like my model for really good twists, I always think of Homestuck. I'm just gonna end right there. Thanks, everyone.
No, what are you working on right now? You secrets, or what should
I'm
people
working
buy? I guess that's or look forward to. I guess I don't know. Buy Chicory immediately.
Chicory, A Colorful Tale is the last game I released. Yeah, I'm working on a secret new one.
Woo!
Yeah.
And I'll say people should buy Boyfriend Dungeon. We're working on an update now.
Yep. I was a Teenage Exocolonist. It's in the festival. You can play it on Steam all during LudoNarraCon, coming out sometime this year.
And you can buy and play any of my old games, Her Story, Telling Lies, and you have to wishlist Immortality, which has so many twists. The idea was, let's try and make a Gene Wolfe novel as a
Woo!
game.
No way! Gene Wolfe? Oh, we didn't even talk about Gene Wolfe.
We didn't talk about Gene
Wolfe.
Wolfe.
Oh my
And
God, Sam, we have to have a whole separate call. Okay.
The thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, go wishlist Immortality.
And Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator in this festival. You can get it on sale. Also, just launched on Switch, and it has a physical version and an LP version, and it's getting an upcoming. It's getting an upcoming really big twisty piece of content that's a tie-in with Inscription, which is itself full of twists.
Oh.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Inscription at all either. We gotta have an Inscription and a Gene Wolfe discussion. All right.
Buy Space Warlord, buy Inscription. I don't even know if it's in the festival, but it's great. Support Daniel Mullins. He's awesome.
All right, and that is our panel. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Right.